You're kneeling in sand, your knees burn. The iron collar around your neck is so tight you can barely swallow. The chain connects you to 11 other women. You can hear them breathing, some crying, one praying in a language you don't recognize. A man's shadow blocks the sun, relief from the heat for half a second. Then hands grab your jaw, force your mouth open. Fingers press against your teeth, your gums, the back of your throat. You gag. He doesn't stop. He checks your tongue for disease, examines your eyes, pulls down your lip like you're a horse at auction, because that's exactly what you are now. 12 days ago, you were the daughter of a village chief in the Sahel. 12 days ago, you had a mother who called your name every morning. She's dead now. You watched it happen, and you kept walking because the men with swords made it clear. Stop moving, join her. In Arabic, they have a word for what you've become. Jariya. It means slave girl. But that translation is too clean, too soft. It hides what the word really means. What it really means is, your body is merchandise now. Your future is whatever a buyer decides to do with it. Your past no longer exists. The man examining you steps back, nods to another man holding a leather pouch. Coins change hands. You've just been sold, for the 3rd time this month, and the place they're taking you? Historians would spend centuries trying to pretend it never existed. This is the Arab slave trade. 14 million Africans. Hawata 300 years. A system so effective at erasing human beings that almost no descendants survive to tell the story. If this history matters to you, drop a like and subscribe. Crown and Dagger doesn't hide from the stories the world tried to bury. You know about the Atlantic slave trade, ships, chains, plantations in America, 12 million Africans transported across the ocean over 400 years. That history has museums, monuments, movies. Children learn about it in school. Politicians give speeches about it. But there was another slave trade, older, longer, and by some measures, even larger. The Arab slave trade began in the 7th century, shortly after the rise of Islam and the Arab conquests that spread across North Africa. It didn't end until the 20th century. Saudi Arabia officially abolished slavery in 1962, Mauritania in 1981. These aren't dates from ancient history. These are dates your grandparents remember. There are people alive today who were born into societies where this trade still operated legally. Between 650 AD and 1900 AD, somewhere between 14 and 17 million Africans were taken from their homes and transported to the Middle East, North Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula. Some historians argue the true number is even higher because records were inconsistent and countless deaths went undocumented. More people, over a longer period, through routes that stretched across 3 continents, yet almost no one talks about it. Why? Because this slave trade was designed to leave no trace, and it succeeded. In America today, there are 45 million people of African descent, living proof of what happened. Their existence keeps the memory alive. Their struggles for equality ensure the history is never forgotten. In the Middle East, after 300 years of importing millions of Africans, almost nothing. Small communities in Yemen, scattered populations in southern Iraq, a few thousand Afro-Arabs in Morocco, tiny remnants where there should be millions. Where did 14 million people go? The answer is the darkest part of this story. The men were castrated. This is not theory. This is documented across hundreds of primary sources spanning multiple centuries. Arab slave traders systematically castrated African males at rates between 80 and 90%. The procedure was performed at specific points along the trade routes. Egyptian monasteries became notorious for it. Coptic Christian monks developed techniques that slightly improved survival rates. Slightly. For every man who survived castration, somewhere between 3 and 5 died from blood loss, infection, or shock. Some sources suggest even higher mortality. Think about that math. If a trader needed 100 living eunuchs to sell at market, he might start with 400 or 500 men. The rest died screaming in the sand. The economics were brutal but logical. Castrated slaves couldn't reproduce, couldn't form families, couldn't create communities that might grow strong enough to resist, couldn't leave descendants who might one day demand freedom. They worked, they aged, they died, and they were replaced with fresh captives from the next raid. Generation after generation, for 1,300 years. But the women served a different function entirely. They were kept intact, kept fertile, kept specifically because of what their bodies could produce. And what happened to them is a story that historical records tell only in careful euphemisms, in silences between words, in details that writers of the time considered too indelicate to describe directly. The machine required constant feeding. Arab merchants weren't raiders themselves. They were businessmen operating sophisticated commercial networks that spanned continents. They didn't attack villages personally. Instead, they created economic systems that incentivized Africans to capture and sell each other. Guns flowed into the continent. European firearms traded through Arab middlemen. Textiles, luxury goods, salt, which was precious in sub-Saharan regions. And in exchange for these goods, human beings. The kingdom of Dahomey, in what is now Benin, became one of the major suppliers. The kingdom's economy grew dependent on annual slave raids against neighbouring peoples. The Sultanate of Zanzibar controlled the East African trade routes. The Funj Sultanate of Sudan dominated the Nile corridor. Various Tuareg groups controlled trans-Saharan routes. African kingdoms waged war on their neighbours, not for territory, but for human merchandise. Captured survivors were marched to collection points and sold to Arab traders. The cycle fed itself endlessly. More guns meant more successful raids. More raids meant more captives. More captives meant more purchasing power. More purchasing power meant more guns. A machine that fed on human misery and grew stronger with every life it consumed. Villages were attacked at dawn when resistance was weakest. Warriors surrounded settlements while people slept. The assault was sudden and overwhelming. Men who resisted were killed immediately. Men who surrendered were evaluated on the spot. Age, health, strength. Young, strong men were separated for castration and sale. Older men with no market value were frequently killed where they stood. But the women faced different calculations entirely. Traders examined them with specific criteria in mind. Age mattered enormously. Girls too young would require years of feeding before becoming useful. Women too old had diminished value. The ideal range was roughly 13 to 25 years old enough to survive the brutal journey ahead, young enough for decades of use. Physical appearance affected price dramatically. Arab markets had specific preferences that experienced traders knew intimately. Certain body types, certain features. Different markets preferred different characteristics. Ethiopian women commanded premium prices across almost all markets. Their features were considered particularly desirable. They might sell for double or triple what women from other regions brought. Women who met desirable criteria were separated immediately. They'd receive marginally better treatment during transport. Not from compassion, never from compassion. Damaged merchandise sold for less. Protecting the investment made economic sense. The separation of families happened at capture sites or collection points. Mothers torn from children, husbands from wives, sisters from brothers. The bonds of a lifetime severed in moments with no hope of reunion. European explorers and missionaries who witnessed these separations left accounts describing scenes of unimaginable grief, the screaming, the desperate clinging as families tried to hold on to each other for a few more seconds. The final moments of contact before chains were pulled tight, and people who had loved each other, their entire lives were dragged in opposite directions, never to meet again, never to know what happened to each other. One missionary wrote that the sounds haunted his dreams for years afterward. that he could still hear the mothers calling for their children decades later, that no matter how far he travelled or how much time passed, those screams followed him. Those screams echoed across Africa for 1,300 years, and almost no one in the outside world heard them. Then came the Sahara. The trans-Saharan routes were journeys measured not in miles but in death. Picture the distance from New York to Denver. Now imagine walking it, in chains, with almost no water, under a sun that kills. From collection points in sub-Saharan Africa to the great markets of North Africa, Tripoli, Tunis, Cairo, Marrakech, caravans travelled distances exceeding 10,500 miles. Some routes stretched over 2,000 miles. The journey took 2 to 3 months under optimal conditions. Conditions were never optimal. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth. Daytime temperatures regularly exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The sand becomes so hot it blisters skin on contact. Shade doesn't exist for hundreds of miles. Then night falls and the temperature plummets. The same desert that broiled you during the day can drop below freezing after dark. The